All right, our next bioethical issue. There's actually a lot of various issues that are a challenge to basic principles of Christianity that we might kind of take for granted and not even think that much about. And it's hard sometimes to see where these various issues even impact our faith. And surrogacy is a little bit like that. Two types of surrogacy. The first is called gestational. The embryos, already fertilized eggs of another couple, are implanted within a woman who is not, therefore, genetically the mother of the child she's going to bear. Second type of surrogacy, traditional. A woman is impregnated with the sperm of a man and carries a child that is hers biologically. It could be a wife impregnated with the genetic material of another man who is not her husband, so the husband is not biologically related to the child. Or it could be a woman who is not the wife being impregnated for a wife who is infertile, so the wife would not be genetically related to the child. Both types are actually fairly common. And the reasons for surrogacy are all, sound okay to some degree. Let's see, we've got those on page 2, actually, bottom of page 2. Look at that. And it can be a very emotional issue. Anytime you're talking about a couple that's infertile, it's a very emotional thing for them. They want very much to have children. So common reasons for surrogacy, bottom of page 2, the husband's infertile or the wife is infertile. Those are probably the two biggest. C, the wife has a medical condition that makes pregnancy dangerous. Cardiac disease can do that, diabetes, some physical disability, a history of failed pregnancies. So a woman may have gone through a great deal of trauma in order to have a child. And she may want desperately to have a baby, but simply can't. So with tears in her eyes and horrible emotions, this seems like a logical way to go forward and be able to have a child. D, the wife has a fear of losing her figure. Celebrity moms, believe it or not, people actually think like this. Lucy Liu, Nicole Kidman, and Sarah Jessica Parker all had children via surrogacy so that it wouldn't get in the way of their acting careers. They wouldn't lose their figure. E, same-sex couples, more and more, that's becoming the reason for surrogacy. And that particular reason will continue to grow. F, single people who want to be parents. And G, age. A woman is getting to the point where carrying a child is dangerous and very difficult, but she maybe didn't have an opportunity to have children earlier in life. Now her career is established, her biological clock is getting to the late years, so rather than risk anything in herself or ruin her career by having to take a long maternity leave, surrogacy seems like a reasonable way to go about having a baby. Christian concerns with surrogacy. Start with the first one, gestational surrogacy, where embryos of another couple, or maybe even your own, eggs harvested from the woman, united with the man's genetic material, create your own kind of pool of embryos, and then implant them in someone else. The first most obvious problem for the Christian faith here involves the method of impregnating the woman. All forms of in vitro fertilization involve abortive practices, and that's what this is. This is in vitro fertilization. And you take a bunch of eggs and you fertilize them, which makes them living beings, and then you pick and choose which ones you're going to use and which ones you're going to flush. There is actually a number of criteria established for determining which of those fertilized eggs are going to be the most viable and the most likelihood of implantation. And that's in the gray box on page 1. These are actually the tests used. And it seems like these tests really are not able to be used until about the 3rd day after they have been fertilized. So they fertilize them and leave them sit in a little petri dish for days and then evaluate them. So in the gray box, this is from a fertility science place. They specialize in this. How is embryo quality assessment and grading done on day 3 of development? There are many embryo grading systems that differ in how they assign grades, in whether on whether a low number grade indicates the best or worst embryo. Cell number, embryos should be at least 2 to 4 cells at 48 hours after egg retrieval, and preferably about 7 to 10 cells by 72 hours. The cells in an embryo are also referred to as blastomeres. That's something else our world does. Mess with the language. Change it so that it sounds as unhuman as possible. So that initial cell division is a blastocyte. We won't even call that an embryo, which is another way to avoid saying baby. So we continue to move our language further and further away from anything human sounding to justify this. A cell regularity, degree and regularity of size of blastomeres. It is generally best if the size of the individual cells referred to as blastomeres in the embryos are similar size. If they're not, it's better if they are close to the same size as compared to very different in size. A degree of fragmentation. Fragmentation, also called blebbing, is a process where portions of the embryo's cells have broken off and are now separate from the nucleated portion of the cell. It is preferable to have little or no fragmentation. Of course, sometimes that fragmentation is a twin. Your cell divides into another human being. So if you're twin, you're kind of automatically on the trash heap. Last paragraph there. Embryo quality, as we see it under the microscope and in the in vitro fertilization lab, gives us reasonable ability to predict the chances for pregnancy after the embryo transfer procedure. However, because there are many other contributing factors involved that we cannot see or measure, the generalizations about quality made from grading embryos are often inaccurate. How's that for a conclusion? Yeah, these are the tests we use, but we're going to tell you up front, they really don't mean that much. Which again goes to show science does not know what it's doing. They are not God. They are shooting in the dark. They are playing God. They are making judgments of life and death in white lab coats and nice clean little labs. But they don't know what they're killing or what they're saving. And their tests that they take so much confidence in are not as definitive as a lot of people seem to think they are. I mean, how many women who are looking at in vitro fertilization actually know that half of their fertilized eggs are going to wind up in the garbage? So, this is a problem for the Christian faith. Anything that winds up being abortive should be a problem for us in the Christian faith. Any procedure that involves taking Eggs that have been fertilized, that is a baby, and killing them is wrong. If life begins at conception, that is human life that's being destroyed. And that applies to certain kinds of birth control, too. Some birth control measures are abortive in nature. Morning after pill sounds, harmless enough. That kills a baby. So page 2. That's the most obvious issue with this, but it goes much deeper than that in things that we don't think of very often. So top of page 2, question. What about the assumption that the couple should have their own children? Just because somebody can doesn't mean somebody should. What about the fact that maybe this is actually God behind the infertility somehow? Can infertility be the will of God? Look up 2 verses. 1 Samuel 1, 5-6. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. The Lord had closed her womb. And her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. It repeats it twice. So as year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her, therefore she wept and did not eat. So this guy named Elkanah has 2 wives, Phinehas and Hannah, and the one wife is mocking the other one because she can't have kids. And Hannah is miserable and cries about it constantly, goes up to the temple, makes her case to God, and it turns out that God was the one who had closed her womb. It says it twice. She was infertile because God had closed her womb. Then, eventually, of course, she will have a son, and that son will grow up to be Samuel the prophet. But at that point, it says God opens her womb. It is God's act whether or not she is able to get pregnant. Genesis 29:31. Genesis 29:31. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. There's God, again, opening and closing the wombs of Rachel and Leah. Having children and fertilization is an act of God. It is not pure biology, and it's not science. God decides who can be pregnant and who cannot be. So, can he give children even with a couple who has fertility issues? Give me one biblical example of that, other than Hannah, which we just looked at. God giving a child to a couple who has fertility issues. Abraham and Sarah. Exactly. And she isn't able to have a baby until she's 90. Absolutely, why not? She doesn't even have intercourse yet, and God opens her womb with Christ. The Bible is actually full of examples of God opening or closing the womb of various couples. It's so much biblically in the hands of God that he determines who should and should not have children. is that even considered in any of this? Now we're to the point medically where if a couple can't, they're not asking questions of, well, is this something obviously that God wants us to bear for some reason? They're asking, well, can we get around this? But I don't think that question should be ignored. Maybe there's a reason why God has chosen that you should not have children. My own uncle and his wife couldn't have kids, so they adopted. They adopted a boy and they adopted a girl. And about, I think it was maybe 7 years or so after they adopted their second child, my aunt got pregnant against all medical odds. And they had a healthy baby girl. So they have 2 older adopted kids and one of their own. But we shouldn't ignore that question, is my point. There may be a reason, and we don't know the reason of God. It's part of the hidden will of God, the Deus absconditus. We don't know why God does everything He does, but if someone can't have a child, why not just put that in God's hands and say maybe there's a reason why? Now, other considerations, again, that we don't often think about. Are there ethical considerations about a woman who is not the mother being the one who puts her life on the line for somebody else's child? Now, think about what you're asking of that woman. You're placing her life on the line for your kid. Is that necessarily a wise thing to do as a Christian? Now, assuming that responsibility and that danger in yourself is one thing, sticking it on somebody else is something altogether different. So again, I don't think that should just be ignored, that we are putting other people's life at risk for our own benefit. And so what if it's done willingly? That's beside the point. It's still ultimately the couple's choice whether or not to go ahead and place that other person's life at risk. Next point, are there emotional, psychological bonds between mother and child, even if the child is not biologically her own? Is it right to ignore those bonds? I wouldn't know this from firsthand experience. I assume, though, that you women who have had children would say that part of the bonding process with your baby happened in the womb. There's something about, that little thing kicking you and you praying for it and with it, singing to your baby while it's still in the womb. There are just so many things, so much of a connection between the mother and the child. It's not just a kind of raw biological test tube where you can make a child grow in insulation. There is a bond, a human bond, that's part of God's process. So is it right for the child or the mother to put her in a position of having a bond like that and then simply cutting it off? Like it doesn't matter. Like it's not part of the overall process of child raising. Another thought. Is it consistent with the Christian faith to see a woman as a vessel to be used? Does that change if she's willing to be used? Now, does it change if the surrogate is biologically related to the couple? There have been cases like that. Somebody's daughter can't have a kid. Mom feels bad about it, even though she's like 60 years old now. So she offers herself as the surrogate, and the couple takes her up on it. So grandma carries her grandbaby, and she's kind of once removed biologically related to the child. Now, where's feminism in the middle of this, which should be all concerned about women being used as objects? That's kind of what's happening. A woman is a vessel. We need a vessel. We need somebody to carry our baby. So let's find some body. So what do we do with all that? Ignore it? Does it even matter? It should. This is the stuff, though, that medical science does not dwell on and does not tell a couple when they come in thinking about surrogacy. They don't go through any of this. They don't put any of these questions in anybody's head. The less we think about it, kind of the better. But as Christians, we can't just be accepting all of these medical possibilities without deep consideration of exactly what it is we are doing and whether that's consistent with our Christian faith. And as Christians, we can't just see others as objects. We can't place other people in danger. So these are hard things to address. Any thoughts before we move to traditional?
How much different is this than any other life-extending medical procedures like organ transplants or cancer treatment or anything like that? That's, maybe a person had a terminal disease or illness or something. I mean, isn't that God's will that they must deal with that? And medicine is coming in and intervening with God's will in that case? I mean, that medicine is a blessing, but is it
right.
that much different?
The difference here is this is still completely 100% within the choice of the couple. This isn't a cancer being forced on them that they have to bear. This is a
Infertility would be.
The infertility is, yes, that's something they have to bear. The question is bearing it as God has given it to you, or looking for solutions that are not necessarily consistent with Christian faith. There is a solution for a couple that's infertile. That is not at all offensive to the Christian faith. Adoption. And there's lots of opportunity out there for that, although it can be a very painful process and a very expensive process. It is nonetheless a process free of all of this. So these choices that put you into this kind of gray area of is this really consistent with the Christian faith or not, are all choices that can be avoided, unlike a lot of the other cancer things that you mentioned. All right, any other thoughts? All right. Yeah. Yeah, it's very sad, very, very emotionally trying, very hard on a couple, that infertility thing, and your heart bleeds for them. It's just as Christians, though, the choices we make when confronted by a gut-wrenching problem like that need to take into consideration all of these other things and not just go ahead and do something because we can. Traditional surrogacy. And again, what traditional surrogacy means is that one of the two people in the couple will be biologically related and will be, either the male will inseminate another female somehow, or the female will be inseminated by another male, but one person in the couple is a genuine parent involved here. So, Genesis 2:23-24. Does this say anything about surrogacy? Genesis 2:23-24. Abraham said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." What does that one flesh statement mean? And what is God's design for marriage? You see, all of these things are involved. God designed marriage to be a man and a woman united as one flesh. And that one flesh thing is a multifaceted idea. It's not as simple as Adam says we're one flesh because Eve was taken out of my rib. Biologically, we're kind of similar genetic code. No, the latest ridiculous thing that I heard from some, woman prostitute someplace, was that Eve was the first transsexual because biologically she started out male. The rib of Adam. They're actually making that argument now. So therefore she's transsexual. Well, of course, yes, she started out from the rib of a male, but transsexuals cannot get pregnant. Although that's changing too. I read something else recently that suggests medical science is going in the direction now that they're going to be able to make actually functional reproductive organs. They're aiming for that with this transsexual thing. But anyway, a little off the track. What Adam is talking about, this one flesh thing, also has to do with childbearing. God designed husband and wife to be the location where one new flesh would be created. And into the wisdom of God with all of this has to do even with things of the difference between male and female. God is giving a married couple who has to live together with a reasonable amount of harmony to be the location where this one flesh would be raised, and by this interaction between male and female would also understand how one treats the opposite sex. So, if it's a boy, the boy will understand growing up with a woman in the house what motherhood and womanhood is all about. And looking at how his father treats her will also learn what manhood is about and how that's supposed to interrelate. He'll learn to grow up accepting differences and knowing how to react to differences. So God's plan, again, with having the one flesh raised by a married couple who are there around each other 24/7, is also for the benefit of that child being raised to be properly socialized and understand how to deal with men and women. There's a study that's been done following the development of children raised in biologically intact mom and dad homes versus being raised by single moms and being raised by same-sex couples. And invariably, the children raised either by same-sex couples, which was, by the way, the worst indicator out of everybody in the study, but followed not that far behind by single moms, showed that the children raised in those circumstances wound up having the most social problems later in life. They were more apt to have regular psychological help with a counselor. They were more apt to experiment with drugs. They were more apt to be sexually active at a young unmarried age. I mean, there's like 52 indicators where they came up in a worse situation socially than intact mom and dad biological families. So again, God's design matters. It's the best for children. It's the best for couples. Now plug that into the surrogacy thing. God's design is the intact home. If you're bringing a third party into that mom and dad home, it's going to create a certain level of chaos that otherwise would not be there. And that third person in the family who is biologically related to that child can, and sometimes does, make legal claim to that child. So they're never actually out of the picture. I've got on the back of this a case study of a woman in Britain. Starts on page 3. The bottom half of page 3. A surrogate mother who won the legal right to keep her baby revealed yesterday why she refused to hand over the child. The surrogate, an inner-city single mother raising her own 2 children on benefits, agreed to give the baby to a wealthy man and his wife who had contacted her via email. They also contracted her. They paid her for this. She believed that they were the perfect couple to raise a child and was paid £4,500 in expenses for her part of the deal. So again, add that to this mess. This is a financial incentive, a financial practice. This is a money-making thing too. There's always money in it. But speaking exclusively to the Daily Mail, the surrogate, who can only be named as Miss N to protect the identity of the baby, told how she had changed her mind because of a startling series of confessions by the wife. She said the woman identified as Miss W told her that her husband was controlling and violent towards her and had once tried to strangle her with a car seatbelt. The woman had previously tried to use a prostitute as her surrogate, Miss N claimed, and had told her she would abort any child with Down syndrome, describing children with the condition as animals. Miss N and Miss W said Miss W had snapped during a foul-mouthed row with an older teenage child and that she had seen the woman bang the teenager's head against an oven. By that stage, the surrogate, who is in her mid-20s, was pregnant and refused to hand over the baby girl after her birth, prompting an extraordinary 6-month court battle as the couple attempted to force her to give them the child. The distraught wife even turned up at the hospital a day before the surrogate was due to give birth, to make a final plea for her to give up the child. In an incredibly rare case, a senior family court judge ruled that the surrogate should be allowed to keep her daughter despite her earlier promise. The case could have far-reaching consequences for countless of other people considering using a surrogate and highlights the potential pitfalls involved in such a deal. Then there's that. How does surrogacy build on or help the intended stability of a family that God designed into it with the man and the woman? It is not just potentially, but really destructive to the peace that God would have in a family. It creates a third party with a say in the whole deal that's nightmarish. And that child, the child also very often, as true with adopted children, when they get to a certain age, they want to know their biological parents. And what does that do to the stability of a mom and dad family who raised a child when the kid suddenly gets to be 16, 17, 18 and says, I want to know my biological mom or my biological dad, and maybe decides they like them better? There's so many little things like that get stuck into the surrogacy thing that just make it not a wise idea on a lot of levels. So, a legitimate biblical question. What about levirate marriage? Isn't that a kind of surrogacy? Look up Deuteronomy 25. The problem with the traditional surrogacy thing is there are actually biblical examples of this where God allowed it. So what do you do with that? Deuteronomy 25, 5 to 10. If brothers dwell together, and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go in to her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be the firstborn son which she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, and that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him, and if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. What do you do with that? Is that surrogacy? How is that different than modern surrogacy? Do you see a difference? There's one. He takes her as a wife. He's taking her on as a second wife. It's not just, you're our vessel we're going to use, and when we're done with you, get out of here. We don't really want you connected. She's the permanent wife. She's the permanent mother of that child, too. She's not doing it for the other couple. So there is that difference. The child will have a mother who will raise it, will have a father. The only thing is, we've got multiple wives in the family now, which has never worked biblically. But this is something God did command. Why? It has everything to do with keeping the family's name alive. And here's where we as Americans don't get it. We're not tribal by nature. That was everything to them. Their family line determined their place as the people of God. They kept very detailed genealogies. And being able to trace back, are you of the tribe of Benjamin or Judah or any of the other 12 tribes? They had to be able to trace that because it mattered that they were of the people of God. And it also mattered what their role would be in that society, because different tribes kind of had different status. If you were of the tribe of Levi, you were of the priestly class, and only Levites could be considered for the priestly office. So you had to be able to prove you were a Levite. But it's this connection to the people of God thing. We have to have a family line alive in order to maintain our place within the people of God. So it was very important for them. What happens to Levirate marriage in the New Testament? Gone. You never hear it mentioned in the New Testament. And in fact, when St. Paul talks about marriage in the New Testament, he says flat out that if a woman's husband dies, she's free to remarry whoever she wants. Levirate marriage is gone. Why has it changed in the New Testament? That whole tribal thing is irrelevant with the coming of Christ. Now, you're not joined to the people of God by virtue of the fact that you can actually trace a family tree into one of the 12 tribes. Now you're part of the people of God by virtue of the fact that God has simply included you in His grace under Christ. Your baptism marks you as the family of God, not your family lineage. So in the New Testament, the entire idea of Levirate marriage is gone and disappears. So the whole thorny issue of a brother having a child on behalf of his other brother in the surrogacy thing, again, is not there. So we can't claim this is the same as surrogacy. And the reason for it was directly tied to faith. Another one. What about Rachel and Leah? Or for that matter, Abraham and Sarah too. What about these women giving their maidservants to their husbands to bear children for the family? That's surrogacy in a form. But is it the same again? Was it good for the family? What was the result of the whole Rachel and Leah thing, each kind of giving their maids to Jacob to father sons in their name? What was the result of that for the family? Chaos. Constant fighting between the women, between the sons. It was not conducive to a peaceful family life. What even happens with Sarah and Hagar when Hagar does in fact bear a child for Abraham? What happens to the relationship between Abraham and Sarah? Falters. Hagar actually starts needling Sarah, thinking she's superior over Sarah because she can have a baby and Sarah can't. It was nightmarish for the family. It got so bad, Abraham actually sends Hagar and what's his name? The son, Ishmael, sends them away because they're at war with Sarah. So has God allowed this sort of thing in the past? Yes. Did it work? No. It was disastrous to the family in every place where it happens throughout the Old Testament. And again, this isn't pure surrogacy. This is not an example of a woman who kind of removes herself from the picture and that child is being raised by a mom and pop family. Those women raised those children and were those children's mother. So they had the constant care of their child growing up. And when the women left, the children went with them. All right.
So you're saying, though, it happened, but it wasn't God's will.
That's what I'm saying.
And then the ultimate confusion and chaos was obviously not the blessing.
Right. Exactly. It was not consistent with what God intended for the family. So, did God allow it at times? Yes. Was it good? No. But the other thing is that actually the same as the surrogacy today? And I'm saying no, it's not the same. So you can't, even though these cases are cited as examples of God allowing surrogacy, it's not really surrogacy God is allowing there. It's something else. All right? Last point under that. Biblically, does the biological mother have parental responsibilities? Is there any biblical example of a woman having a kid with God's blessing and just giving it up and walking away from it? Never. Never. All of these examples of women like the servants of Rachel, Leah, Sarah, all of those women raised those children as their own. None of them relinquished their motherly rights and duties. So it's just unheard of that a parent would simply abandon a child to somebody else to raise. Legally, can she claim parental rights? Well, as we saw from that case of England, yes, actually. If a surrogate mother decides she wants visitation rights, she may very well be able to get it. And what's that going to do to the family? And what's that going to do to the kid? You know, who's its mother? What confusion that's going to create in the poor child's mind. All right, page 3. Here's another angle on it. Top of page 3. Something else being done. Leah Swanberg, the CEO of Canadian Fertility Consulting, has created a program which draws upon shamanistic rites and fertility goddess worship to motivate her surrogates. Her 4-week online course guides participants through their surrogate journey in a sacred and beautiful way. It includes sacred crystal essence, crystal water to raise your surrogacy pregnancy vibration. I don't even know what this next word is. Ayurvedic recipes, almond milk and honey ceremonial bath, understanding your sacred milk, and fear release. Sacred surrogacy offers quite a different way of looking at gestation. Rather than a commercial transaction, it's a participation in a sisterhood of another word I don't know, something women. I don't even want to try and pronounce it. A surrogate is a woman who shares of herself by giving the ultimate gift of parenthood to another. It is a process in which you will carry a baby for a single couple, gay or straight family. You will be blessed as you join a sisterhood of women who will share in this beautiful journey with you. There's a lot of wacky stuff out there. So I guess bottom line, just in closing, the medical field creates possibilities that promise to alleviate immediate, very emotionally traumatic problems for people. Surrogacy being one example of that. But the more medicine promises to relieve problems, the more issues it actually creates for Christian faith. If there was no Christian faith involved in any of this, this would be easy. Sure, whatever is most expedient. But there's just so much God has kind of built in to what it means to be man, what it means to be woman, what it means to be family, what it means to raise children, that these sorts of things can't just be embraced willy-nilly without digging into what this all really means. And I think, frankly, as Christians, surrogacy is one of those things, although it at first doesn't look to be like that big a deal, it creates so many questions and uncertainties and just outright things that aren't healthy for God's design of family, that this is not the sort of thing Christians ought to be participating in. Especially the gestational type, just flat out is wrong because it's abortive. But even the other, that's not abortive, it's just not a healthy situation for the design of family that God has created. It's not good for anybody involved. All right, no other thoughts, no other comments? Let's close with prayer. Gracious Father, we do thank you for the gift of family that you have given us and the parents that you've given to raise us. And we pray you grant us wisdom in these confusing times, that we may be able to sort through the difficulties that life presents and see your truth and stand with it. For Jesus' sake, amen.